thank you to PwC for having me here to make this presentation on an important study done by the Lakshman Kadirgama Institute of International Relations and Strategic Studies. It's entitled The Port City SEZ, a Catalyst for Modern Services in Sri Lanka. Today I'm going to briefly talk about the background and aim of the study. Then I'll give you a sense of the main findings of what we have done. And I'll talk there a bit about how services have been an important driver of growth, both globally and also in Sri Lanka.
I can't hear anything. Is it going on?
Of modern services.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll log out and log in. Okay, wait. Okay.
Then I'll talk about scenarios for pathways for the evolution of the port city. And last, I'll look at some international practices for service SEZs and what lessons they may mean for Sri Lanka. Next slide, please. So in terms of the backdrop, the Port City SEZ was basically launched in 2014, and it basically had the idea of being a world-class smart city in South Asia, and the first of this kind in some way. And for Sri Lanka, it's particularly significant because it's the single largest foreign investment in our history. And with the election of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in November last year, he talked about accelerating the timeline, and he appointed a committee of experts to look at the project and its policy regime. But of course, since then, we've had the COVID crisis that has emerged, and government has shifted, particularly to look at the pandemic and the economic aspects. And the work of the committee is still ongoing. And so some of what we are talking about today will be very useful to help inform that work. The punchline of my presentation is really that the formulation and implementation of a coherent policy framework is essential for the port city as we go forward. Next slide. Now, what we tried to do in our independent study, which the port city asked us to do, was really look at the potential for it to become a catalyst for services-led growth in Sri Lanka. And the key question is this a big game changer for the country? And how do we make it all happen? And to try to look at this, we did three sorts of things. We looked at the positioning of the services industry globally and where Sri Lanka fits in, particularly with something called modern services. Then we looked at scenarios for how this may evolve over the next 20 odd years, because of course this is a really long-term project and there are different things that may happen in the future. And the third thing is, what might we do in terms of policies when we compare with other places which have done this type of development, and what is it we take away from this? And we used a combination of methods to try to answer these questions. Next slide, please. So on to the question of services. Now, services are sort of under the radar in most countries, but they're terribly important globally. And services account for something like over half of global value added, even today. And this is really concentrated in North America and Europe. But Asia is much more important today than it was maybe 30 years ago. And part of this is with the shift of the world center of gravity to Asia, services have naturally come upon manufacturing. Now, what has been noticeable about what happened in services is the shift from what we call traditional services towards modern services. Now, traditional services are things like public administration, education, trade, investment, retail, construction, things like that, which are kind of a bedrock of many economies. But increasingly, people are looking at these modern services, which are ICT, finance and insurance, and professional services. These modern services are important because they are associated with better productivity and growth and exports, which are, of course, critical for a country like Sri Lanka, which has a foreign exchange challenge at the moment. And we see when we look at these numbers in Sri Lanka, services are already the most important sector in our economy in terms of GDP or employment. But traditional services are what dominates the picture. There are some 50-odd% of what services we may have, and modern services are only some 8%, and very little of this is traded internationally. Now, these types of services, these modern services in particular, face a lot of regulatory problems in Sri Lanka. We all familiar with the fact that Sri Lanka is 99th on the World Bank's Doing Business Index, which is what maps the environment for the private sector. And there's a whole list of things, not just regulations, but human capital and other things that stop us. And this is where the Port City SEZ comes into play. You know, it creates an infrastructure with a tax and policy regime around it, which deal with many of these constraints. And that's why it's kind of useful to have this as an important tool to catalyze the growth of modern services. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this PowerPoint, essentially, which you will see, has some charts, which I won't go into, but it just gives you the shares of global services and things of that type. And what you see here is that Sri Lanka is very low in terms of services which are sort of traded globally, or as a share of global services. And you can look at these things at your leisure, but this gives you some idea. Next slide, please. Is a much more detailed picture of services value added by different types and its contribution to employment. I want you to look at this aspect because it's services exports, which tells us about the tradability of modern services. And if you look at this, Sri Lanka's tradability of its services generally is quite low compared to Southeast Asian countries, which are more advanced than us, and particularly this area of modern services. If you look at Singapore, for instance, it's a very important area for Singapore, but likewise in the Philippines and Malaysia and Thailand and so on. And even in a country like India, these modern services are terribly important. And that was the point I want to make, that these modern services are very much part of economic development as time passes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, the second thing we tried to do is look at scenarios for how the port city might move forward. And scenario analysis is a very useful tool for thinking about the future. And its kind of origins was somebody called Herman Kahn, an American who kind of pioneered these tools for looking at the future and reducing the uncertainties that we might have and thinking about what measures we may have. And he started doing this in the 1950s. And he did this primarily at the RAND Corporation for the US military, but then later on the oil companies, you know, people like Shell and BP and others started using it. And you can see why, you know, these are for projects that are long gestation periods with huge economic investment. So you want to try to think about uncertainty and reduce the confidence interval that people might look at this. Now, applying it to this study, we tried to look at 3 scenarios that looked at internal factors and external factors, and we try to look at the favorability of these things with terms of or unfavorability. And what we got out of it were, 3 sorts of things. We looked at one scenario 1, which is a benign global environment, and Sri Lanka implements critical reforms. We judged that some majority of the port city would be operational by 2041. So this is probably the most favorable scenario that we thought. Then there is a second scenario where we have a supportive global environment and limited domestic reforms. After a lot of consideration, we thought maybe some 2/3 of the port city would be operational by 2041. And then there was the sort of difficult scenario, which is where we have global discord and domestic instability, lack of reform, a crisis continues. The outcome would be very little operationalization of this port city. Now, what is interesting in the report, and we dovetail with colleagues from PwC, is we tried to look at what impact these scenarios would have on different outcomes for the port city in terms of employment in Sri Lanka, foreign investment, value added, government revenue, balance of payments. And I'm sure this will be talked about my PwC colleague in a bit, but you got different levels according to what we'd be assuming. And it's fascinating when you think about this. And the conclusion is that to achieve a best case, we need to have not only a global environment that's somewhat benign, but also, very importantly, Sri Lanka has a coherent framework around the port city. Next slide, please. Now, the important question is, well, what is that favorable policy and tax and other regime? So to kind of look at that, we decided to look at something called benchmarking, which is what you do is you look at other areas which may have done well in terms of performance of a particular phenomenon, and then you try to see, well, what are the features that might be relevant to your own context? And so we looked at 4 SEZs in Asia and the Middle East. We looked at the United Arab Emirates, we looked at India, we looked at South Korea, and we looked at Malaysia. And we tried to pick a range of locations across Asia and different experiences. And these are important not only because these are considered some success, but also these are areas where Sri Lanka may have to compete in the future, particularly in a more complicated post-COVID environment. Next slide, please. Here are some features of the success, and the indicators are very clear in what they have managed to achieve. And when the report is available, you may look at it in terms of your leisure. What I want to get to is some of the policies the country has adopted and some of the policies the SEZ itself has adopted. Next slide, please. So here is a very simple traffic light system. And the way to read this is along the left-hand side axis, you have country-specific factors that seem very important. You have supply-side conditions, macro policies, the political environment, and then you have particular factors that are relevant to the SEZ, regulatory institutions, land, tax, things of that nature. And green, obviously, is a good place. The yellow is sort of an intermediate place. And then you have a red, which is weaknesses, and then you have a gray, which is unspecified. Now, just to very briefly give you some highlights from what we have in good SEZs, you need a business-friendly, open regime, particularly if you're a small country, and the Dubai experience as well as that of Malaysia tell us that very clearly. And one important aspect is to have access to larger markets, particularly in neighboring areas. And so the experience of Malaysia and Korea are instructive because not only did they try to build good diplomatic relations with large neighbors, the ASEAN countries or Japan, for instance, but they also developed various types of trade and investment agreements that provided the confidence and the rules for investors to come to something like their equivalent to the port cities. So that is a very important condition, because you need to enlarge the market if you want to attract people to come and to provide rules-based trade and investment, which is very, very important if you want to have people investing, $100 million or $50 million in your location. A second very important factor, country condition, is to have the right kind of skills and human capital. And there are 2 things that are relevant. One is your university system have to produce the STEM graduates, science, engineering, mathematics, and technology, of sufficient quantities so that this port city can be fueled by the human capital, which Sri Lanka traditionally has been famous for, but we may not have the right supply. The second thing is policies towards a kind of an open labor market where people can come on orderly and transparent work permits to work in the port city. And this is very much the example of not only Malaysia, but also Dubai, which famously imports many skilled people. And technology and skill transfer occurs when these such people come. And over time, that becomes very, very important to fuel this kind of development. Then we look at the port city relevant factors or the SEZ specific factors. And one issue concerns the tax regime. One of the things that comes out of the World Bank doing business surveys is that Sri Lanka's tax regime is not very attractive in many features. Firstly, it's not very competitive. Secondly, it's poorly administered. And so, with something like an SEZ, you need to relook at this whole question of corporate tax incentives. And Dubai, for instance, provides, 40-year tax concessions for corporates. Other places provide reductions in tax compared to other areas. You have to also have very clear rules of land ownership, on leasing and regulation. You had to have rules around sustainability, you had to have rules around labor, adjustment as you need. So these conditions become very, very important. At one level, this is not rocket science, I must admit, but we really have to sort of move on. If you see, the number of areas which are unspecified in Sri Lanka, but also the sort of reds and the yellows, if you like, we have some homework to do in Sri Lanka, which is very important if we want to make this project a success. Last slide, please. So let me just conclude with saying, this post-COVID environment that we face in Sri Lanka has thrown a spanner in the works of everybody's plans. And, we are facing a tremendous hit on the economic side, which everyone is well aware of in 2020. Maybe some optimism for 2021. And Sri Lanka is entering this very competitive game of urban development through SEZs, which is across this region. But, the good part of this is we put down a marker, by launching this transformative project, the Port City. And, we can attempt to realize this ambition of becoming a regional trading as well as services hub. Long time we've talked about our location and the fact we have that advantage. And but we need to also draw on the experience of what works and what does not work. There are a lot of things that don't work, but there's also clear lessons of what works. And for me, the bottom line from all of this work is that if we put in place a good economic policy framework with a competitive SEZ framework, we can certainly improve the odds for the Port City to succeed, over these next decades in these much more difficult economic times. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I've taken a little more time than I may have taken. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naraja. I have shut down my camera for technical reasons, but thank you very much for setting the stage with regard to for this discussion. I'd like to move on to Aruna Perera to make his presentation on the give a brief overview of economic impact.
Thanks, Nista. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Aruna, I like to talk. Presentation.
Sure. Nista, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present the findings of our study. So again, what I would like to do is that give a context of what we did and briefly touch on the methodology that we adopted and then move on to details of our findings. And also there are certain limitations also in the study that also I will touch briefly. Viren, can you move on to the next slide? So the purpose of our assignment was to understand the economic impact of the Port City project on Sri Lankan economy. So when we are doing that, what we did initially was that to make it manageable and divide the Port City project into 3 distinct stages. Why we did that? Number 1, to make it manageable. Number 2, to make, because the impact that is deriving from those 3 stages are slightly different from each other. So you can see in the presentation, the 3 stages. Stage 1, reclamation, infrastructure development, and land lease. Stage 2, construction. Stage 3, operational. So these are the 3 stages that we looked at when we were analyzing the impact of the Port City project on the Sri Lankan economy. Then specifically, we looked at 5 parameters. These 5 parameters are also in the presentation. They are employment, foreign direct investments, balance of payment, value addition, and government revenue. Those are the 5 aspects that we analyzed. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can see the 3 stages that I talked about earlier. The stage 1 is the reclamation and infrastructure development, as well as the lease of land. And reclamation of land has already started, and infrastructure development of phase 1 is underway. We expect the construction to start in 2021 and complete by 2041. That is the construction stage where the buildings are going to come up. The final stage is operational stage. Operational stage is basically when the businesses in the port city start to operate. When we are assessing the impact of each of these areas, reclamation and infrastructure stage, of course, is a one-off impact. Once the refilling of the land gets completed, when the infrastructure development gets completed, when the land is leased out, that stage is over. Construction stage is also a one-off impact, because once the construction of the buildings is over, that impact will be captured. But important thing is operational stage, which is a recurring impact. Every year that impact will be there. And to measure the impact of that stage, what we did was we looked at the impact that would have been there in a mature year of operation of the port city businesses. Next slide, please. Okay, data collection. Data collection happened at 3 stages. It was a massive data collection effort. We collected data at the micro stage or micro level, that is basically collecting data, speaking to individuals, speaking to contractors, speaking to firms, having those discussions and collecting the data. Then at meso level, which is more sectorial or sector level data collection. Let's say the port city has hospitals. So collecting data at the hospital industry level. It has hotels, collecting data at the hotels level. Then the macro level. Macro level data were specifically used to convert the financial models into economic model. Things like output input ratios and various other surveys were used for the macro level data. Next slide, please. Okay. This is important. There are 3 types of impact we try to measure: direct impact, indirect impact, and induced impact. If I explain using an example, let's assume there's a hotel in the port city that is operating. By the operation of the hotel inside the port city, the value it adds, the revenue it generates, and then employment it provides is a direct impact. The indirect impact is something slightly beyond that. Let's assume a hotel in the port city buy carrots, some vegetables from a farmer in Kandy or Nuwara. So that person will get an income. That person will create or harvest carrots and supply to port city, that particular hotel. Capturing that impact, we call the indirect impact. The third one, induced impact, goes slightly beyond that as well. Let's say that farmer who's growing. Am I audible?
Come and see what happens. Shall I get my own computer? Come, it's okay. Get in.
Am I audible?
Can't hear a thing.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sure. So if you look at, let's say, the farmer in Nuwara or Kandy, let's assume he employs 5 laborers in his field. Now he's going to pay money for those people. And by doing that, they are going to create a demand. They might buy a shirt. They might pay for their children's education. That is the induced impact that we try to capture. So we captured in our study the direct impact, indirect impact, as well as the induced impact. Next slide, please, Viray. Okay. These are the various sectors that are available in the port city. Now, if you look at the sectors, there's a school, there's an international school, there's a hospital, there's a convention center, there is an integrated resort and a theme park, hospitality sector, there are various hotels, number of hotels, then there are retail shops, supermarkets and things like that. Then there's office space where we expect different types of offices to be located. IT, professional services, regional headquarters, all sorts of offices to be set up. Then the residential. Residential includes both apartments as well as single houses, or the people where people can live. And also there will be car parks that are going to be there to facilitate the visitors as well as the people who are going to stay in these particular apartments as well as various other business centers. Now, all these things are specified in a document called DCR. DCR stands for Development Control Regulations. So we extract information from the DCR when we are building our models to estimate the economic impact. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, taking an example, I'll briefly touch the methodology that we adopted. So the DCR specifies the GFA, that is the gross flow area of each of the sectors. Let's say, for example, hospitality sector, hotels. Then what did we do? We looked at the local and international peers. Local peers was not sufficient because Port City used to operate at a different level. And using that, we try to build a model for the sector. For example, let's say GFA has allocated, the DCR has allocated 10,000 square feet for hotels. So that can be used to determine how many hotel rooms are going to be built by looking at the usable space of that particular 10,000 square feet, as well as the size of a hotel room by looking at various international and local peers. Then once you determine the number of rooms using drivers such as RevPAR, number of employees per room, the gross margin ratios, EBITDA margins, you can build a financial model for that sector. So after building a financial model for that sector, next challenge is to basically convert that into an economic model. So we did that using various tools. I have to acknowledge and appreciate the assistance we got from Dr. Priyanka Dunusinghe from University of Colombo also when doing all these economic model conversions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's move on to the 5 areas I talked about earlier. 5 key economic variables we measured: employment, foreign direct investment, balance of payment, value addition, and finally the government revenue. Now you can see the number of jobs that we expect to be created by the Port City project at different stages: land reclamation, construction, operational. So in summary, you can see in the operational stage, it will be about somewhere around 200,000 jobs. Construction stage, somewhere around 150 to 175,000 man years of jobs. In addition to the creation of jobs, if you look at these jobs, there will be, of course, some foreign employment also, but there will be a lot of local employees also getting the jobs there. And also, there will be skilled labor, there will be unskilled labor. One other important aspect that we have to understand, we have to emphasize in this particular job creation is the knowledge transfer. Because the foreign employees that are expected to come to work in the Port City, we expect to bring with them the state-of-art technology and latest knowledge. And by working with them, we expect the local employees also to improve their productivity and come to a position that they can demand a better salary and a better income. So that is one of the, I would say, soft aspects that will also be created, that will also be granted under the employment, other than the number of employment opportunities that are going to get created. This captures both direct and indirect impact of employment. Next slide, please. Okay, value addition. Now, value addition we captured again under 3 stages: reclamation, construction, and operation. And when the land is reclaimed, this land is going to be leased out to various parties. About 178 hectares of land is going to be leased out. And there is if you deduct the various input costs from the value of this land, then there's a value addition that comes into play. Similarly, during the construction stage, there's a lot of rental. There's going to be a lot of apartments which are going to be sold, and those apartments are going to be constructed. And again, if you take the value addition between the input and output, we have quantified that value addition. And during the operational stage, also what we have done is we have looked at the difference between the revenue that is generated and various intermediate expenses and arrived at the value addition. If you look at the first 2 stages, first 4.6 billion of reclamation stage, it is a one-off impact. Second, roughly about 13 billion in the construction stage, it's also limited to the construction period and maybe one-off. But operational stage, around 12 billion, that is going to reoccur every year as companies produce, as companies provide services, and as companies export and sell. So this is the value addition that we have estimated. Again, we have looked at both direct and indirect impact when we are computing the value addition. Next slide, please. Foreign direct investments. Now, foreign direct investments, what we have done is we have looked at, again, the 3 stages. During the reclamation stage, the foreign direct investment is going to come from 2 specific sources. Number 1, we are going to get it. We have already received it because Port City invested 1.4 billion worth of money in the project during the reclamation stage. And once the land is going to be sold out, now part of this land, I would correct myself, rather than using the word sold out, let's say leased out, because the ownership of the land is with the government. They are going to be given out on a 99-year old lease. So when the land is going to be leased out, foreigners may invest. When foreigners invest, that foreign direct investment is going to come here. So that will basically contribute to the FDIs in the reclamation and the land lease stage, which we estimate to be somewhere around 4.1 billion. Then the construction. Construction also. Various construction companies may set up office here to construct various buildings. And Port City is also going to construct some buildings on their own. So that will result in inflow of investment, either in the form of equity or in the form of foreign debt, which will basically contribute as FDI. Then those are again limited to the construction stage. But the last column, if you see operational, that's a recurring one. Here, what we have taken is the reinvestment done by the companies that are operating in the Port City to be the FDI, that particular reinvestment to be considered as FDI during the operational stage. Moving on to the next slide. Balance of payment. Balance of payment, of course, are going to be benefited by the FDIs that I discussed earlier. In addition to that, there are few other sources of revenue that will, or sources of inflows that will benefit or that will affect the balance of payments. For an example, during the construction stage, we expect these apartments and houses that are built up to be sold. They might receive advances. The constructors may receive advances during the construction stage itself. That will result in a foreign exchange inflow. And during the operation stage, a lot of companies are going to export various services, and a lot of tourists are going to visit the Port City, and that will also result in a foreign exchange inflow. Of course, there will be outflows. The outflows mainly comes from, number one, outflows mainly come from when you import material, import goods. That is outflow. You have to pay to the foreign workers their salaries and wages. That is also going to be an outflow. The foreign loans that you obtain, you have to service them. Loans plus interest. That is also an outflow. And finally, there will be a little bit coming from the repatriation of profit of the companies that are operating in the port city. So there will be outflows also, but we expect the net impact to be positive to the economy. Next slide, please. The government revenue. The government revenue is going to come from two main sources. One of them is the tax revenue. The other one is the non-tax revenue. If I look at the non-tax revenue, the government is going to get 62 hectares of land, which they can lease out on a 99-year basis lease. Now, once they do that, government will get a major part of their revenue, non-tax revenue. And also, there will be various charges the government will be imposing, like giving approvals, giving licenses. From that also, government is going to make some money. And from the tax side, there will be stamp duty. There will be income tax. There will be tax on employment income. There will be VAT. So all these are going to be a part of the government revenue. Of course, how much revenue the government is going to earn depends on various tax regimes and tax concessions it will grant to various businesses and offices that are operating within the port city. Another important aspect that we cannot forget is the social aspect. Not only revenue, there will be a leading hospital with 300,000 beds. There will be international schools with 1,000 students. And there will be a convention center with 13,000, which can accommodate 13,000 participants. All these things will add to the social infrastructure of the country. So that is also a more non-monetary benefit the government might add to the people in Sri Lanka. Of course, I want to emphasize one of the points Dr. Vignaraja pointed out. Everything depends on the timely execution of the project. So what we did was, we took a 100% perfect scenario. What will be the impact from that? Then what we did was, we looked at the three scenarios Dr. Vignaraja explained a little while ago. If those three scenarios, 85%, 65%, and 30% scenarios, if those are going to be there due to various circumstances that are going to prevail in the country and the world, what would be the impact? So that is the basic, that is basically what we did. We feel that it is going to benefit the economy and the country, but timely execution is paramount. You can get more details with all the details, assumptions, and various scenarios if you go through our report that has been published. Thank you. Over to you, Mr.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arna, for that comprehensive presentation. We have heard so much about from various insights. I'd like to invite Tulsi to give a status update on with regard to the Port City.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. I'd like to thank Dr. Vignaraja from LKI and Aruna from PwC for the excellent study. Let me kind of also emphasize the purpose of these two independent studies. One was to quantify the impact of the Port City project or the Sri Lankan economy. That's done by the PwC. And the other study by LKI to really emphasize the policy framework that is required for us to really see this investment through. So by these both studies, which the reports are made available, that it really validates the importance of this project for Sri Lanka as an independent to large institutions. In terms of the update on the Port City, we have completed reclamation work during early last year, and now we have commenced construction of internal infrastructure, that is utilities, road network, etc., and including the landscaping of public spaces. We hope to complete all that by next year. Obviously, due to COVID-19 pandemic, there is some slowdown in the activity, but with the country getting back to normalcy, we hope that we can also commence our construction activities as scheduled. I guess objective of me being available today is mostly to really, if you have any questions, I've already seen some of the questions posted on the construction timeframes, etc., is to really answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Tulsi. No, we just there's so much. Maybe how can we know how far has it progressed with stage 1? I understand that you all signed an MOU for the marina recently. Is that the first one that is off the ground at Port City?
Yeah, so we have now completed the reclamation works, and if you go to our website, we have floated 10 RFPs, requests for proposals, for 10 landlots. The extent of the landlots is about 20 hectares. Now, marina is one of them, and the MOU we really signed on the marina is with a local party, is to run a pontoon as a temporary arrangement for 2 years to create the footfall that is required until we really sign something with a reputed international marina operator. Now, on the 10 RFPs, which is now made available or we are ready for investment, one of them is a mixed-use development, which is consisting of office, residential, and retail on a 3-hectare land. As you would understand, during these challenging times, it is important to instill confidence. Investor confidence is key. And we have come forward as the project company who had already committed to invest 1.4 billion on the reclamation works. We have come forward to invest further $1 billion on the vertical development. And we are working closely with the BOI. And you will hear formal communication in that regard very soon. By that, what we really want to do is communicate to the international investors that the Sri Lanka is now really open for business.
Okay. That's, I think, fairly hot news, I guess, for all the webinar participants. Pre-announcement, I guess. I remember that when it was announced, a 13 to 14 billion dollar investment was envisaged over a period of over different phases. You spoke about 10 RFPs. How much of that investment what's the kind of investment for these 10 RFPs? Is there any figure available? Which one of the 14 billion, how much of investment do you envisage in the first, say, from now onwards in the next 3 years?
Yeah, so 14 billion is based on our total gross flow area, developable area based on a set master plan at today's cost. Now that 14 billion transpires into 74 marketable plots. Of 74 marketable plots, this RFP refers to about 10 plots with an extent of about 20 hectares.
Okay, right. There is no investment, but you're just looking at a area. Fine.
Area, and as I said, of the 74 NISTA land plots, This entails about 10 lots.
10, yeah. 10 lots. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. And if anybody who is interested, obviously can go to our website, look at these RFPs and engage with us on one-on-one for further questions and clarifications that they may have.
Okay. You also mentioned that the CHEC is showing its commitment and confidence with a commitment of $1 billion investment going further. What has been the response so far from investor community, developer community, both for the 10 RFPs as well as overall for the project? 10
RFPs were actually made available just very, very recently. But based on our market sounding exercise, I think the reactions have been mixed. Some other investors post Easter Sunday attacks. That was last year. And then obviously recent pandemic. So they are kind of playing a waiting and seeing, how this transpires. Some of the investors are quite confident that because this is a 25-year project and there is only a short-term impact, and we are in discussions with them. It is important to really recognize that there is a lot of competition in the region. And for Port City to be positioned as an attractive proposition, we really need to differentiate or be competitive in attracting that foreign capital to flow our way. That's why, as Dr. Vignaraja also said, the proposed special economic zone law is quite crucial for us to be able to try and market and position competitively to attract investment, because we are a small island nation and we depend heavily on investments and trade.
Good. Thanks, Tulsi, for that. Dr. Vignaraja, can I bring you into the discussion? There's also a question, I think Tulsi also referred to it. There's a question from the participants. What does Dr. Vignaraja think needed to present to make Port City a truly competitive SEZ compared with some of the Southeastern Asian countries? I know you made lots of checklists, but if you were to sort of prioritize, Tulsi spoke about a SEZ law. If you were to prioritize to see in the next few years what the government or what Sri Lanka needs to do to make it accelerate the Port City.
So we really have to have a coherent law that is very investor friendly and makes people confident that if they invest $100 million in Sri Lanka, that money will generate a return of 200 million, let's say. Because that's what this type of proposition means, over a long period. I think we don't want to just get the $2 and $3 million investors. I think that is not the ambition, right? And what the $100 million investors really want is a law that's clear and transparent and protects property and the rights of investors, and provides some tax concessions, and also market access. So in the Sri Lankan case, we've been negotiating FTA upgrading with India for some time. Now that's very critical if we want to attract Indian investment, which is looking to leave, say, Gurgaon or Bangalore to come here, because those are expensive places, very polluted, and also at risk of COVID, whereas in Sri Lanka, we've overcome some of those challenges, right? So I think that's important. Likewise, we need to have an agreement with China so that Chinese investors have confidence. And now with the Hong Kong factor going forward, people may be wanting to leave Hong Kong. And so Sri Lanka needs a law, an institutional framework, and then we have to tackle these longer term issues of the skill supply, both in terms of keeping an open labor market to bring in skilled people here, but also to ensure that our university system upgrades. Government is aware of some of these things, but I think we need to move a bit faster in a more coherent manner. I hope that answers your question. So Sri Lanka is open for business, and that signal needs to be very, very clearly articulated, not just by statements made by people, but also by concrete actions on the ground, such as the law, such as the infrastructure, such as the signal for education. It also means having, foreign universities come here to set up. I mean, to provide world-class skills. Much as I like our local universities, and I also teach a little bit at one of them, we need to really bring in, the top places in Asia, and so to provide the graduates that we need.
Okay. No, I understand the checklist, but both Tulsi and maybe Aruna, can you see whether has there been any progress? I mean, we're talking about the special law for some time.
Yeah, let me give you an update on that, Nisa. Definitely. So how the Port City was structured was in two ways. One was the hard infrastructure, and that's what you see on the ground. What you don't see is the soft infrastructure that is required to make it happen. Now, it's a public-private partnership where we have come forward to make the investment to have that hard infrastructure ready. And as you know, the hard infrastructure is actually ready now. Prerogative of the government was to have the software ready in place so that we can go out there and sell in the market. And must say that yes, there has been delays from the government side in keeping or getting the software implemented. In terms of the progress on that, where it stands now is after the new Gotabaya, His Excellency Gotabaya Rajapaksa was appointed as the president, and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa actually appointed a 3-member cabinet committee to review there was a draft law which was in place, which was in quite advanced stage, for them to review that draft law and make any improvements and recommendations for us to implement it. I understand that the 3-member committee has now concluded that review, and what we would shortly see is that post-election, this law would be tabled for cabinet and parliamentary approval, and we hope that before end of this year, the Port City Special Economic Zone law would be implemented.
Excellent. That's good news. Aruna, what is your own take in the terms of progress in getting the software ready? Because that is a first question that any investor will ask. We don't have we still don't have the tax incentives in place. We don't have the law in place. So it's always a challenge when you're going to talk about it. Any insight?
So I think Tulsi basically covered the progress that the Port City has made there. The important thing from our perspective is that achieving, as you correctly said, without any further hiccups, getting the law in place and making the Port Cities investor attractive is extremely important. And also, I understand there are some tax concessions that are also available, but further fine tuning that to suit the Port City might also attract more investments.
If I may add to that, Nisa, what the government has done is that until the Port City SDG law is implemented, this government has reactivated the Strategic Development Project Act.
Okay.
Where, depending on size of your investment, you will be entitled for sweeping direct and indirect tax exemptions. For instance, even on the 10 RFP floated, any investor is eligible on the capital investment to benefit from STP Act. What the SEZ law does is really create incentives for the secondary demand that is required, which can be less capital intensive, because a developer is not going to put up 2-3 tower office buildings unless otherwise they are confident that they can be occupied. That is where the SEZ law comes into place, and as an interim measure, government has reactivated STP now.
Okay, that's good. So I'll move on to few because we have just maybe take some participants' questions. Some you have answered. This question about there is one question about the environment aspect. I think Port City may have addressed some of these environmental issues. Are you still facing concerns about the environment?
Yeah. So let me. So we have done 3 EIAs, environmental impact assessments. 2 were done on the reclamation stage in terms of reclaiming what is the impact, and those were made available for public scrutiny because there is a procedure protocol that you need to follow. And we received over 200 written submissions, and a panel of experts have engaged, and we have adhered to. And based on the comments and the EIA in place, we were issued what is called an EIA or the license to proceed with conditions. I think if I recall, the first EIA for reclamation stipulated over 72 conditions in it. For us to make sure we address those, there's what is called EMP, an environmental management plan in place. Then there was a third EIA done for vertical development. We know there is a master plan and what is the build-up area. Based on that, the third EIA was done, and also the same procedure was followed, and the license was issued based on, I think, about 50 or 55 conditions stipulated in the license, and the environmental management plan in place. There are 26 government agencies currently monitoring this large project, and I can assure you that all environmental protocols, international standards have been met. And I'd like to also add here, we have what is called development control regulations. These are international standard guidelines where each developer, when they build on these 74 plots, they need to adhere to. It's a 1,700 volume, 4 chapters. It has urban design, utilities, landscaping, and more importantly, sustainability. So for each 74 plots, we have detailed guidelines where developers had to adhere to. And we are working with the Urban Development Authority now. So, and these laws are going to be gazetted soon, so that it becomes law. I mean, all of us agree that ad hoc, unplanned development in Colombo, what has resulted in. So, in order to avoid that, because this is a planned city, we will be following international standard guidelines, and once it's going to be gazetted very soon, it becomes law.
Okay. This one specific question about impact of rising sea levels due to climate change is that there was a webinar participant question. Did you notice that? Is that you're responding? That's those things also address part of climate change.
Absolutely. Sea level rise, and we have done analytical models to understand the impact of that, and all that is being addressed in detail in the DCR.
Okay, good. We talked about there are a couple of questions about human resource skills requirement. I think both presentations touched on it. There is also talk about whether the jobs will be only for foreigners or for whether locals, whether it will be low skilled, high skilled. What kind of a human capital dimension are we talking about? Vignaraj spoke about getting education right, getting the universities right now itself, so that we are ready. I remember there was talk about 80,000 new jobs to be created by the Port City going forward. How much of that will happen in the next few years? Let's say I'm looking at a 5-year horizon, or you think the most of the jobs will come only at the latter stages?
No. So also, let me also couple with another question which I saw: why is Port City taking 20 or 25 years to build, as Dubai has built in 5 years? Actually, we can build it in 10 years if the demand was there. Dubai said, "We build, you come." That kind of attitude. So what I'm trying to say is we have created the infrastructure, not by stages. The land was reclaimed in one go. It's just the development is segregated into 2 phases. And depending on the demand, obviously the project can take 10 years, 20 years, or if the demand is subdued, it can even take 30 years because investors have to have confidence to come and build on it. To answer your question, which is quite relevant as well, it all depends on the demand side. But the 83,000 jobs are estimated based on Port City being fully operational and direct jobs. Now, for instance, if you take office space within Port City, in Colombo, with the proposed A-grade office space, we have close to about 500,000 square meters of A-grade office space that is existing and what is proposed. Now, in Port City, we are proposing 1.5 million square meters of office space, almost about 3 times of that. Now, in terms of the development program, our phase 1, which we hope we can conclude within about 10 years, is predominantly commercial office. That's how the master plan is done. And phase 2 is more residential. So the thinking behind is trade and commerce has to happen for us to be able to demand the office occupancy so that the residential occupancy in phase 2 can be achieved. So in terms of the employment, what Mr. spoke about, majority will come in phase 1, and I would hope within the first 10 years or so, a combination of obviously local and foreign. As you know, there's a lot of people now leave Sri Lanka every year. Close to about 80 to 100,000 people still emigrate for better opportunities overseas. Of that, about 15 to 20,000 professionals leave Sri Lanka. And what we hope is with this space created, we will have multinational companies coming and setting up in Port City to access the region. And also the local companies use Port City as a platform to go international. And by doing that, we will create high value jobs so that hopefully we can arrest the brain drain somewhat and also encourage some of the expat Sri Lankans to return to Sri Lanka.
Fine. I remember that the first flagship venture would be the financial city. Is there a rethink of financial city by the new government, or you think that it is continuing? The idea is continuing that we will see the financial city first. Can you just expand on that? Yeah.
Yes. So the calling it a Colombo International Financial Center was actually mooted by the former Prime Minister, Mr. Wickramasinghe.
Yeah.
And what we did was, in collaboration with the government, we've hired certain experts to see how we can position Colombo as a financial services hub. As you know, there is Singapore, there is Hong Kong, and there's quite a bit in the region. Actually, financial services centers have failed more than succeeded. So a study consisting of former head of strategy at Dubai International Financial Center, former head of legal at Qatar Financial Center, former CEO of Qatar Financial Center, including PwC office in Dubai, in collaboration with the Sri Lankan office, they did a study to see, look, where is the demand coming from? Do we have that comparative advantage to attract financial services? So what the study threw out was that financial services would be an enabler, but Port City should be created as a hub for business excellence, multi-service hub. And as demand evolves, not only financial services, it could be even maritime services or IT. Those can come on board. So that decision was made actually within the previous regime itself to kind of move away from pure financial services to multi-service special economic zone. And I understand the thinking of this government is also to continue with that thought process.
Okay, fine. So there is change. I mean, so just trying to clarify which hub would start first. If you think financial services would evolve eventually, are you looking at again a mixed development kind of concept, retail?
No. Okay. So we have Port City has five districts. Of that, we call the financial district is the business district, really, not specifically for financial services, but for businesses. So our development, even the RFPs 10 forward you will see, is in that financial district with marina and some residential coming on board, which has to integrate.
Okay, thanks. That clarifies. Okay, Aruna, I mean, from a consulting perspective, whom would you encourage? Is it there is a story about I think Kulshwar spoke about MNCs, multinationals coming in and setting it up, but is this going to be exclusive for foreign companies? Would a Sri Lankan company can relocate its head office there? I mean, what is the potential?
Yeah, I think, thank you for that question, Nista. So it can, in my opinion, it can be available for both parties, especially if you look at, if you say that anyone who wants to take advantage of the location, Sri Lanka as a location can benefit from that. Probably, let's say that European or American companies or companies in the Western Hemisphere want to diverse into or come to the Asia Pacific region, and as an alternative to Singapore, Hong Kong, they can set up a head office here. And also there's another possibility, probably Indian companies. If they want a secondary office or if they want to diverse a risk a little bit and set up office here, I think it's a good opportunity. Also for Sri Lankan companies, I don't see any restrictions Sri Lankan companies going and setting up office to be competitive, to attract more investors, because it's important sometimes to be present there. Some people, are present in certain buildings in Colombo because it gives that glamour and the status. So similarly, I think Sri Lankan companies may also set up their headquarters there and do the operations from there. And I think another important aspect, yes, there will be businesses which are located within the port city. But something that I want to discuss a little bit moving away from that concept is that even the businesses and offices which are operating outside the port city, rest of the Sri Lanka, I believe they can use it as a chain. Let's say you are operating, this is how I see it, you are operating, let's say, a tour operator. And you operate as a tour operator, you have your main office in Port City. And you have the hotel also. People will come there, stay in that hotel. And then there are other hotels or other places these people want to visit also. So going there and setting up an office there as maybe a status symbol, better connection to the foreigners, and then using that to connect with their rest of businesses, I think will result in a lot of benefits to the companies.
Okay, fine. Dr. Vignaraja, can I bring you in just before I take some questions? Yeah. I think Tulsi mentioned about Sri Lanka and the port city facing the challenge of Easter Sunday setback, COVID now. People are talking about recession for the next 2-3 years. In that context, in that sort of gloomy outlook, how confident are you that people will look at relocating and investing, developing new, going for new developments? I want Dr. Vignaraj to respond, or you feel that because of the recession challenges that this is an ideal opportunity?
So look, it will be a bad year in 2020. There's little doubt about that, right? Sri Lankan growth is going to be less than last year. That's a fact. I've written elsewhere about whether we will have a V-shaped recovery or an L-shaped recovery in Asia, or is it an I, in fact? This is the kind of open question, and there are different factors that point to all this. And so much it will depend on, the US-China dynamics in this. There's a trade war going on. It's spilling out into a Cold War, people say, and supply chains are relocating. Now, that bit of it is the manufacturing side. I mean, luckily, this is not a manufacturing place, right? This is a services hub. So that's one advantage, that we may have. I think if we can make it, lean, mean, green, to use those catchphrases, and really cut the red tape. As you may know, I supported the Pathfinder Foundation recently to come up with a new report, and we talked about massive digitization of public services and red tape. So everything can be got online, and if we're prepared to do all of that, it can help, right? So yes, the macro picture is uncertain. But I think some kind of recovery we will start to see next year under some assumptions. So I think there is a scenario to say, look, come mid next year we may see some green shoots globally. Okay, and that's also assuming that you will have a presidential election in the United States with a clear mandate for probably some sort of change. You will have a softening with US-China and things of that type. And then with services, I think there will be an attempt to relocate. Of course, digitization is a counterforce to relocation, right? So, with what we are doing now, digitization will be mass spread and people may use that. So the port city may jump into that if the digitized infrastructure is very good in the port city, right? And we have a very clean environment for both expats and Sri Lankans to locate into the port city. So, in this very competitive game, you've got to have the tax and the policy regime right. You've got to make it a very business-friendly place. Our 99th ranking on the Doing Business Index is pretty hopeless, right? I mean, I would really want us to be at least in the top 35 or 40 in the world, and that requires a major effort. And I think we can do it, with a very, clear policy. And the very last point, I want to come back to the labor market. Look, I'll be honest as a private viewer. I worry about Sri Lankans being able to work in the port city, right? And that is a factor. Yes, the brain drain can be reversed. There's a group there. There are people who are abroad who may come. But I worry about our graduates getting employability because we have some very clever graduates. But there are issues of employability even before. So our university system, and the president has recognized this, right? He went and has said we really need to change the curricula and suit it to the port city and places like that. That means the STEM subjects. That also means English education. It means Chinese. It means other languages, and it means the discipline of working long and hard. So there are real issues about graduates coming in. So I worry about that. That is a risk factor for Sri Lanka. And the very last point I want to make, if you allow me 10 seconds, is the linkages between the port city and the rest of the economy. This is critical, right? The port city should be seen not as an enclave, but as a modern sector part to drive modern services, which is linked to the rest of the Sri Lankan economy, right? So that, the port city will purchase goods and services from the rest of the Sri Lankan economy. It will employ people. And, it's the job of the developers and others, as well as government as a whole, to make sure those connections can occur so the benefits spread. We don't want, the early EPZs, which were very much enclaves, Biagama and Katanaik and so on were enclaves. And we need to ensure that it's a linked development to power the rest of the country. So let me stop for now.
Thank you. Excellent. So what is being reinforced is that Port City can be actually a catalyst for Sri Lanka's next wave of growth, despite the COVID challenges global. I think, is that what you're sort of reinforcing?
Yes, if we do the right things now in this very competitive environment, right? And one of the things we try to do with that Pathfinder report is to identify what are some of those right things now. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
So government has a huge agenda with the COVID situation. We've got to ensure that we look after the poor because they are very badly hit by this, right? And social protection and agriculture, etc., are very important. We've got to make sure that we also finance the country, right? That's another very important factor because, our foreign exchange reserves are not so high, but we don't have a debt crisis in my view, but there is a debt distress issue, which is going to be there for some time. Yeah. Luckily, this project is an investment, not a loan. I mean, so I'm very supportive of this project on that ground. Okay. The third point is we've really got to then, when government has dealt with those first two big challenges, take a very clear view on the environment for business because, government alone cannot take us out into a high growth environment. Business has to do that. And The port city is a critical part of that equation. And we have to really have, the best business environment in South Asia, right? We've got to connect to the Indian market. There's no question about that in my view. Sri Lanka is a small country of 22 million, isn't going to power the port city by itself. We've got to link to China. We've got to create the graduates. All of these factors are there. Let me stop for now.
Okay, fine. Tulsi, just want to, Doctor spoke about, making it very inclusive, ensuring that the port city actually contributes to the connects with rest of the economy. How can local contractors bid for contracts in the port city? I mean, how does it work?
Of course, there is no subject to or contrary to popular view. See, if you look at Port City, let's say let me start with the staff. On site, we have about 1,600 in total working on site. Of that, close to 80% is Sri Lankan nationals. Okay, about 23% is Chinese and foreign nationals. Similarly, in our office is a similar case. So there is, and most even on Port City, although the EPC contractor is China Harbour Engineering, these subcontract to a lot of local subcontractors. I think we have over 30 or 40 local subcontractors already working on the reclamation and internal infrastructure state. Now, for instance, during COVID-19, actually our construction came almost to a halt because all our machine operators, cranes, excavators, all machine operators are locals. And because of the curfew, obviously they were not able to make it work. So there is no restriction at all. And then the second point is, now when the investors come and take position or lease these plots, obviously they have the right to hire their own contractor. But typically, if there is scale locally, because of the cost factors as well, they would tend to hire locals. But having said that, productivity is a concern.
Yeah, good. But also local such development will be sort of guided by this particular code that you spoke about, right? Sustainable development,
which will be gazetted and becomes law.
Okay, fine. I'll take one question from which leads to my other question. There is a question to Tulsi saying, what's the average value per square meter for 14 land plots on RFPs?
Yeah, so the value of land, again, depends on what the FA are or the purpose of that plot. Value will differ from a mixed-use development of a 60 stories to a hotel, or it differs. But what I like to say is that we have what we want to see at this stage is development taking place. So we are really not going out to the market saying this is per perch value, but we are open for one-on-one discussion. And what I can tell you is that it will not be too different to prevailing market rates in Colombo 1 and 2. Again, value differs based on the purpose of that each plot.
Aruna, can you bring some insights to all the valuations that you're so famous for?
Thanks, Lisa. So when computing the land, value of the land, there were various factors that we took into account. What we did was we looked at the recent transactions that took place in, as Tulsi correctly mentioned, Colombo 1, Colombo 2 area. And we have also took into account the fact that it's not an outright sale, it is a 99-year lease. And of course, the value of the land inside the port city will vary from one plot to the other. One is because, as Tulsi correctly mentioned, the use is different. The second one is that if you look at the DCR, The DCR specifies how to build, what to build, how many stories. Some lands I know is there's a restriction maybe 5 to 6 floors. Other land you can go up to 60 floors. So that results in the usable area. So that also need to be taken into account. And another aspect that we need to take into account is that when this land become available, whether it will result in a little bit of a oversupply condition in the market and will result in the overall prices to go down. So considering all those factors, the recent transactions, the fact that it is a 99-year lease, the different users of the land, various restrictions that are available in the DCR, what will be the market condition of land demand and supply, we arrived at a conservative value of maybe about 13 million a perch in our estimate. But of course, it can vary based on the conditions that you can see. It's just an average.
Okay. Tulsi, maybe you can answer this question, maybe also Aruna. Even before COVID, we had issues about oversupply in terms of accommodation, star class accommodation in the city. You're adding more hotels in the port city as well, and there's mixed views about office space glut, and you're going to add more capacity. Post-COVID, I think people are going to ask more questions about the oversupply. How confident that you're not worsening the problem?
Yep. Okay. Good question. Let me first address on the supply of land. Obviously, we have access to a large pool of prime location land. What we will ensure is that our strategy is not to flood the market, so that the prices can really bottom out. So we will be strategically releasing those land parcels into the market, not to drive the prices down or let land prices skyrocket. On the office buildings, obviously there's significant shortage in A-grade office space. I think there is a requirement to be supply requirement on that. On the apartment in Sri Lanka, there are about, or in Colombo, there are about close to 11,900 units inventory. That is what is in place at the moment and what is in the pipeline. Of that, 60% is already absorbed. About 40%, that's about, I think, about 4,500 units inventory is currently unsold. Now, if you look at the sales velocities post-Easter and then obviously post-pandemic, it has really come down. But once it reached some sort of a normalcy, typically average velocity of apartments per month has been about 50 to 60 per month. And if you assume that will take 5 years from now for the existing unsold inventory, taking into consideration what is in the pipeline as well. Port City breaking ground by next year for that first development I mentioned to you. By the time we come to the market, it will be around that time, 4 to 5 years. That's one point. So that we are confident that we are not really flooding the existing market. And the second point is that at the moment, if you look at the demand or historical demand patterns, 90% or 95% has been Sri Lankan and Sri Lankan expats. We have not really even scratched the surface of attracting foreigners to Port City. And Port City is positioned not to really cater, or the local demand doesn't suffice. So it is to position as a regional hub. So once we have the foreign demand coming in with the software in place, I don't see that there will be an oversupply or we will flood the market.
Just to add to what Tulsi said, I think Tulsi's analysis, I think he analyzed it very well regarding the apartment. Regarding the office space also, I believe, some part of the people will get used to working from home, and the rent expense, some people might think whether it is too much. But what I feel is that it may impact the A-grade officers. If you look at Port City or other main A-grade officers of Sri Lanka, Colombo City, people are using as to entertain the customers, bring the customers, have those conversations as a marketing thing. So still it may continue. What might happen is that less than A-grade buildings, which actually higher rent need to be paid, people may thinking of relocating to peripheries or going for more home working environment. But per se, A-grade building per se, there may be an impact, but it may not be that drastic.
Okay, thank you. We're almost up to 12:30 now, but I have two questions. I'll take a few questions from the webinar participants. Tulsi, this is for you. I mean, these common concerns. What about electricity, water supply? Are you going to create a shortage because you're going to be guzzling? I mean, you'll be basically, once it's fully developed, whether we have the capacity to supply. And then also, what kind of administration? I know it's a special administrative district is what they call. What's going to be? What kind of law enforcement will be applicable? I mean, can you sort of, I know it's too early, or whether you all have thought about it going forward?
Yes, let me first address on the energy usage. So when we obviously is a planned city, so we have modeled, because this is not a difficult exercise. First is we need to understand what is the demand, and we know the build-up capacity, and we have an idea of how this will get built up. So based on that, we have modeled the energy usage for Port City, water, electricity, etc., etc., etc. Then
that will be Tulsi. It will be internally generated, right?
Yeah. First is the internally what is the requirement. Obviously, we need to discuss with the government because it's the PPP. Because we are tapping into finally the national grid. That's the public-private arrangement partnership. We invest all the utility infrastructure within Port City is the responsibility of the project company. Government of Sri Lanka has to bring those connections to the periphery of the Port City site. Now, once we did this modeling to understand what is the demand, we look at that with the government long-term power generation plan, for instance, to see, look, does it add up? If the government sticks to its long-term power generation plan, obviously there is adequate demand. Our main concern is actually the electricity. Water is actually taken care of. And even investors ask these questions, rightly so. It matches with the long-term power generation plan of the government. If there was shortfalls from that side, obviously Port City will have an impact as well. And we are in discussions, are currently also looking at alternate solutions for that. I hope I have answered that question. The second question is on the administrative district. It was declared as part of Colombo administrative district about a year back. So it's not Hong Kong like to China, or it's part of Colombo, very importantly. And there's two things. One, there will be what is called an estate management company set up, a joint venture between the government of Sri Lanka and the project company to administer and manage the common areas within Port City. Common areas is 1/3, 91 hectares of the 269, which is parks, waterways, road, is common areas. To make sure efficient service of quality for owners, occupiers within Port City, estate management company will manage that. It's a joint venture. The whole of Port City, once the law is in place, there will be what is called whatever the name that is, can be a Port City authority or commission, which is a government body. And any investor who wants to invest, operate, even a business within Port City is required to get a license through this government agency. It's a government agency to operate within Port City. So that is the administrative arrangement for managing of the hard infrastructure, and on the software side, obviously, and these licenses are renewed and ensure compliance. Obviously, finally, what I want to emphasize is this is the landlord of this is government of Sri Lanka. We have been given, as the project company, certain amount of land parcel for us to monetize for the investment we have made already.
Okay.
We are not, as the project company, investing or developing in all of the land which is allocated to us, because we have our obligation to our financiers, which is actually kicking start by end of this year. And so we need to really lease out and attract international investors to come and really lease out this property.
Okay. In terms of law enforcement, will there be a separate police, or you think it will be coming under Sri Lanka police, the law enforcement?
Yeah. I mean, there are certain things in terms of border control, legal registration, all will be part of Sri Lanka. I mean, what you can think is like the Board of Investment, industrial zones, that is more manufacturing, export oriented. This is going to be a very much service oriented SEC.
Okay.
But if you use it rightly, that can be a tool to reform some of the archaic laws, regulations within a controlled environment, can also act as a test bed for the government to test some of these policies from smart taxing, etc. And once you kind of get it right, you can selectively roll it out in rest of Colombo and Sri Lanka.
Good. Agreed with you on that perspective. One final question. I mean, I think maybe PwC and Daylifty can do another part 2 of this Port City. We have so many questions, but I just want to know. I know CHEC is doing its act, or sort of continuing to be aggressive. There is also a component for the UDA, which it has to develop certain sections of the Port City. Do you than you all, or you think because of various what progress are you seeing? Are there more financial constraints? They have problems.
Mr. You
hear me, Tulsi?
Yeah, you're kind of breaking up. Can you kind of repeat that question, please?
Sorry. Okay. Just want to know there is a limit, certain sections of the Port City which UDA is in charge of in development. How progressive has it been?
Yeah, so one thing is that there is so government has 62 lots of marketable land, 62 hectares of marketable land, which transpires into 28 lots. We have 178, that's 48 lots. Now, the lots are scattered everywhere. It is not, the master plan is not saying this half is government of Sri Lanka and this half is to be developed by Port City. The master plan has to seamlessly integrate. So government and Port City has to work in collaboration to market first Sri Lanka, then Colombo, and then Port City. So we have just floated some of the RFPs in terms of the government main 3 plots, which is the International School, Hospital, and the Convention Center. I think government is also looking to float an RFP quite shortly, and the demand or interest on international school side has been very encouraging. A lot of schools from UK have expressed a lot of interest to come and set up a primary and secondary education center here. And so we are working collaboratively, and you will see some of these RFPs for the strategic blocks will also come to market this year.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think I need to wrap it up. So thank you. I hope I'm audible enough. Thank you very much, Dr. Vignaraja, for your time and insights. Tulsi as well, and Aruna for bringing the PwC assessment into our webinar participants. We have noted a couple of questions. Maybe we'll see what we can do with regard to answering them. I would like to thank everyone on behalf of PwC and the Daily FT for spending time as well as sharing insights, and for participants to make it very effective. We shall meet you again with another webinar in the next few days. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.